Well, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel on George Floyd's death, race in America, and envisioning a better future. My name is Ajo Kennedy, and I'm professor and associate chair in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And co-hosting this panel with me is Don Webster, who is the chair of the school and has kindly offered to man the chat channel. So the chat channel is very much a part of the panel, and we are going to encourage you, to throw in your comments, questions, reflections there. So I have a few comments. They will take 5 minutes, and then we'll go straight into the panel. Last Friday, we polled a number of students, faculty, and staff about hosting this panel in civil and environmental engineering, and found there was unanimous agreement that we should do this panel. What we also found is that different individuals are at different places with respect to dealing with the death of George Floyd, long-standing race issues in the US. And so this has informed how we structured the panel. You'll notice that we left it open, and that was intentional. Okay, we've asked the panelists to pose their own questions and reflect on them. And we've told them that whatever they have to say is of value, because that's what's on their hearts at this time. And we've put together a balanced representative panel. I'll introduce them in a couple of minutes. But before I do so, I want to tell you three things on my mind and heart. Okay, I think first of all that it's really a very good thing that we get to have this forum where we can talk honestly and openly about race, because and then also envision a better America, because I think that is one way we can advance positively in this climate. Secondly, I want to acknowledge that there are many who are hurt and angry and frustrated at the repeated killings of Blacks by police officers without recourse. I also want to acknowledge there are many George Floyds, some we never heard about because there was no camera, and some we never heard about because there was no death. Okay, so we should not, one of the things I tell myself is we should not become desensitized because of the multiplicity of these killings. And also that the lives of the people that have been lost should not be in vain. Okay, so I think then that presents an opportunity for us to ask how we can channel the emotions we are feeling into some real positive and lasting change. Okay, and so this panel and this forum is one place where we can start to have that kind of dialogue, which will move towards that change, hopefully. So without much ado, I would like to introduce the panel members. We have 8 panel members today. Sean Tyndale is a BSMS student in our program. Victoria Dean, PhD candidate. Jacob Tsegaibe is one of our alums, and he's a senior transport policy advisor to the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms. Danielle Ramirez is part of our staff. She is an academic program coordinator. Jorge Macedo is an assistant professor. Kari Watkins is an associate professor. Rahim Baya is the vice president of research for the institute, and also a professor in electrical and computer engineering. And then we have Steve McLoughlin, who is the dean of the College of Engineering. So without much ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Tyndale. Sean, we can't hear you. I think you need to unmute. Let me see. Let me go and find you and unmute you.
I got it. Thanks. So, hey everyone, I'm Sean Tyndale. I'd first like to just thank Dr. Amakudzi and Dr. Burns for giving me an opportunity to join this panel to be a part of this discussion. The video of George Floyd's death was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to watch. I felt a lot of anger, and I had to give it some thought about where it was coming from, on like a fundamental level, because the video is horrendous and he's murdering a man. but I wanted to find out whether that was a racial issue or just a police brutality issue. So first, I'd like to say that I've dealt with racist encounters in my life on two big encounters. One Caucasian calling me the N-word after nearly hitting me with his car in my own neighborhood. And one in middle school, African American peers of mine in middle school calling me a terrorist from Iraq. For any of those who know me, I'm an American, and my family is from Jamaica. And those are the few times I know for certain that I've experienced racism because it was made very clear in their words. I've had many more difficulties having interactions with people and having to tolerate, confront, or ignore their internal hatred towards me. But these are people who have something internally wrong with them that we can't fix. And I guess you can fix them. I guess some therapy, hopefully. But we thought it was a generational problem and that it would go away and die with institutionalized racism. But we see viral videos like the one from Carrollton where, kids in high school are explicitly showing their faces and saying disgusting things about the Black community and painting all of African Americans with one brush. In my own experience, it's clear that racism is the problem, and it exists in all communities regardless of age, race, and gender. And it begs the question that if it's not institutionalized, then where is it coming from? My answer is we as a society are keeping it alive by even acknowledging that races exist. And how do we fix it? We do things like we're doing now, creating dialogue between people from different backgrounds. I think one thing that we can do even further is eliminate the race checkoff list on every application as if it actually matters what the color of your skin is. We can teach the next generations basic understanding of people's skin colors and facial structures based on the regions of Earth that they originate from, so that it's just a common sense thing. At the end of the day, race is a label we created in our heads and causes a division of people. I'm trying to make this clear because I also think in not acknowledging it, we need to stop placing blame where it's just not quite clear and focus on the evidence we have at hand to incite change. We have a real opportunity here to change an ongoing problem in our society, and that's simply police abusing power. When I watched the video, of course, I was shocked at this detestable man murdering George Floyd. But the more alarming thing to me that isn't being widely as addressed is a police officer willing to defend his actions. Any logical person seeing the video would say that it's a horrible thing that he's doing. However, all of his fellow officers defended him up until the moment he killed Floyd. If we look back at Stanford prison experiments, and the main question in what happens is if you're a person into a high position of power, if you give a person a high authority, they abuse it very easily. This is clear evidence that police can essentially become an organized gang, and the shared experiences and video footage, shown of the community, and with police brutality, go back to when policing were first created. And we look at the policing history, particularly in the South. They were created as slave patrols, but that's still nothing that we can't. I'm inclined to believe that many police can discriminate when they put on the badge, either willingly or out of fear of their lives. And with police, it's safe to paint most of them, all of them, with a brush because every single officer swore an oath And that's why it's so shocking here in the U.S. to see this symbol that's supposed to protect and serve civilians murder one of us. It's completely shocking and horrible. And I think a way to make change is if they're willing to take that oath, I think they need to be able to face the much more strict standards for their accountability, or have a severe reduction in their power. I think this is an actionable change that we can make as a society, and I just hope that this message remains clear. With all the things going on today. So, yeah, I think that's my say, and I thank you guys for listening, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for that reflection. We'll go next to Victoria.
I think, Victoria.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to Dr. Kennedy for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I'm definitely a little nervous, transparency, because more so I just want to make sure, my words get across to everyone. So hopefully you hear where I'm coming from. The death of and killing of George Floyd was super impactful to me. Every senseless killing of a Black individual by the police obviously hits home. I think with everything going on in the world in general, it was just kind of like compounding interest there, which is probably why the world has decided that we've had enough. I definitely, as a Black individual, think about my dad when thinking about, we've also had a killing of a Black man running in a neighborhood that people didn't feel like he belonged in, and my dad runs every single day. Breonna Taylor is the same exact age that I am, so that, again, all of these things hit directly at home. I had a cousin of mine, he gets off work late and he decided to come over and hang out. I was genuinely fearful for him to go home because when he needed to leave, it was past curfew, and we have incidents in Atlanta where police are pulling individuals out of their car from leaving a protest. And if I live in Midtown Atlanta, the police can assume that he's leaving a protest and is, then harmful to someone for whatever reason. And so in my opinion, there's a sentiment that's been going out in the interwebs of it's not enough to be non-racist, that we must be anti-racist. And I think that baseline informs what I would like to see change within the department and in the institution as a whole, as how we adhere to the events that have taken place and events that have been going on for centuries. I think it takes more than for us to decide, we should treat Black people with respect. We shouldn't call Black people by inappropriate terminology. I think we have to recognize the history and historical context of where Black individuals have stood in this country, our origins in this country as a whole. And we have to recognize our work is not us assimilating into this culture that you all or everyone has established for us. It is now recognizing that we have to undo some past wrongs in order for people to even try and be on similar playing fields. So I'm not necessarily in the camp of me not being recognized as a Black individual. For me, it is not a compliment to, for me to be friends with someone and they later say, we had such a good time. We have so much in common. I didn't even recognize you were Black. For me, that's not a compliment. I've owned my race, and it has so much to do with who I am. But there are also things that I feel like I deserve and my people deserve to, again, just be treated fairly in this country that currently is not taking place. So I'm going to move into just things I'd like to see. One, campus police. Me personally, I feel like there's a lot of money that goes into the campus police that could personally be directed elsewhere. I'm thinking back to my personal experiences that I had as an undergraduate at the University of Texas and campus police. I was the first Black RA at a dorm that is known for rich white girls to stay in. And so as a result, they did not believe I lived there. So right as I'm driving into my dorm, I'm pulled over by the police. They are asking me why I'm going there. Meanwhile, literally a couple of feet away, there are clearly intoxicated, underaged, college students, but I'm getting pulled over. And they are questioning, later call for backup, are searching my car, and still have not given a reason for pulling me over, but it's just questioning, essentially why, or, for me to prove to them that I actually live there. Of course, I got no ticket because there was no real reason for me to get pulled over. But that's my experience with campus police, or just kind of at Georgia Tech, glorified crossing guards, which is great, but do crossing guards need guns? I don't know. In thinking about the 2017 killing of Scout Schultz, when I was a student here at Georgia Tech when that happened, and I verbally said out loud when that news became evident that if the campus police killed a white man, what hope is there for me? So I think that the presence or overzealous presence of police on campus is actually slightly triggering to Black students. For me, historically, the police have never helped me with anything. And as has been mentioned, we think about the foundation of the police, and it's not great. Thinking also, at Georgia Tech, the number of Black students and the number of Black faculty and staff members is not representative of surrounding communities. And that's something that has to be addressed, and that's something that, race is at the forefront of. I've been a test prep tutor for standardized testing. This is one, stopping point for a lot of Black students being able to be admitted into the university. As a tutor, I never tutored one Black student. Why? Because systemically, Black people are not making as much as white people, and therefore they are going to have different access when it comes to test prep, and therefore, impede their access into higher education. So that is something that if we're serious about increasing the number of Black students that are able to come to campus, I feel like that's something that has to be addressed. Faculty and staff members, I think it's, I'm scrolling through the list in civil and environmental engineering and come across Dr. Kennedy. I'm obviously initially drawn to her because she is the one person I know of in our department that is Black, and I think that that's not great. My reason for coming to Georgia Tech had a lot to do with the fact that it was in Atlanta, and I come from an oil and gas background, so I'm always the only one, whether that's Black or a woman. And so I was excited about being able to find a university in the South where I would be able to see more people that look like me. And unfortunately, that's still not the case. I think this is my last one, when we think about tenure for faculty and staff members, again, if we really wanted to be a part of the core structure of us, righting our wrongs, essentially, I believe that social and racial sensitivity questions should possibly be a part of how we evaluate professors at the end of the semester, and ensuring that students actually feel comfortable when we're there. Many people that are, identify with various groups, whether that's based on race or sexuality or what have you, or gender, you're probably going to experience some sort of imposter syndrome. And recognizing that, Black students are within that number, and the intersectionality of Black students compounds that. I think that how comfortable students feel with the professors that are in front of them is just as important as how many research dollars that a professor can bring to a university. So I think if we are serious about that, that's important. The money that is directed from campus police can go into professionals that have dealt with this. Also, historically, I can speak to my lived experiences, but at the end of the day, I'm not an African American diaspora studies major. I feel like there are very eligible people in third-party organizations that could really help evoke real change within our institution and our department.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. Our next panelist, Jacob Segaibe, is an alum and the Senior Transport Policy Advisor to the Mayor of Atlanta.
All right, thank you. So I got asked two things that are impossibly hard. One, to talk about an impossibly hard topic in 5 minutes, and then secondly, the grace to have no guidance and say what you want, which is really difficult when something is this hard to talk about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes because otherwise I'll be the only one to speak. But let me first start off by saying that this is really hard. This is really hard. It's really complex. What we're seeing in our country is, it's not a straightforward thing. And I think that's the first piece, right? It is not a simple policy change. It is not, this is going to be done tomorrow. This is hard. This is centuries old. This is systems. It's difficult. And that feeling that you feel, if you are a non-person of color, that anger or that sadness or that I don't know how to feel or that numbness, I would sit on that and feel it. And the reason I say that is because that is a feeling that a lot of your counterparts, people of color, feel regularly, right? And this national energy behind everything going on is really exciting, but it's also it's new to a lot of people. But this is what it feels like, right? The sadness, the anger, the fact that people are in the streets. I mean, this is a feeling that people of color are very familiar with, and specifically Black people in America, right? So I think that's an important thing to start off with. And what you're feeling is it may not feel normal, but it is normal for some people, and you shouldn't discount it, and you shouldn't feel like the world is upside down. This is real. I'm a African American male. I'm a first generation American. My parents are immigrants. If you want to use Trump language, I'm an anchor baby. I'm Jewish. My mother's from Israel. I'm an African. I grew up in an area that nobody looked like me. I grew up in an area where nobody was Jewish. If you can say it, I've heard it. It's just, like these feelings that you're feeling for some people are like, for me, like these are things that I've felt my whole life, right? Coming home from school after a hard test, like that's hard. It's really hard when you're coming home from school from a hard test and then somebody also just called you a hard name you didn't really want to hear, right? So just realize that the people around you, people of color, are living in a complexity on a regular basis, and that's hard. The next thing that I'll say though is, and this is where I think people often miss the mark, is people often think that racism is about people. And in my opinion, racism is about systems, right? So as you get upset about racism, rather than getting upset with that officer or getting upset with that person or that professor, realize that those type of actions can only be perpetuated within certain systems, and that certain systems are perpetuating certain outcomes for certain people. And that's really important because you don't solve racism with individuals. You solve racism with systems. And I'll go back to this piece around complexity, right? Let me give you a few examples, right? My best friend is a police officer. She's a Black queer woman. We grew up together. She is right now being shouted at riots, and people are telling her that she's a traitor. She's struggling really hard. She is a police officer. These things are really complex, right? And it relates to the systems that we're in. I'll give you another example. I'm a Black male. I went to Georgia Tech. I mentioned all that stuff before. I was homecoming king. I was Mr. Georgia Tech. The night after I was Mr. Georgia Tech, I got stopped by police on campus and asked to see my ID. Right? These are the systems that we live in, and like these are normal experiences for people of color, and the complexity and all of that, right? And the last thing I think that's really important is people see people like me and they say there can't be a system. Or racism, we've gotten so far past it. But then what people don't talk about are the systems that align for people like me to be successful, right? I'm an engineer. I did very well when I was at Georgia Tech, and I went on to get 3 graduate degrees, and I work for the mayor, all that good stuff. What people may not know is that I went to Georgia Tech without knowing a civil engineer, never met one in my life. But also when I was at Georgia Tech, my graduate advisor was a Black woman who's on the line right now, and I feel very fortunate to have had. The chair of my department when I was at Georgia Tech was a Black male Dr. DeRoche, who's now at Rice, and he's the provost over there. The dean of my school of engineering was a black male who was Dr. May. And all of these people put me in an environment where I was supported so that I could feel comfortable going back into class the day after a police officer was asking me if I even belonged on this campus. Right? So the other piece to it, and that's very important, is that we have to remember that, you know, there are like people who you may see at Georgia Tech, and I got to stop soon. That's my 5 minutes. I told you I'll go on forever. There are anomalies often, and it's because of systems that make it very hard. So let me just close with this. What can you do? And I think it was already said. You can do something. You can be anti-racist, right? And you have to find a way to do that in everything that you do. I used to work at a very, very large consulting firm making a lot of money, and I took a big pay cut and came to work in city government. Do I work on racism every day? No, that's not my job. But do I do anti-racist work every chance I get? Yes. Do I try to bring in an equity lens into everything that I do? Yes. And that is something that all of us can do. Whether it's you working in a Fortune 500 company, whether it's you making the choice to be in a nonprofit, whether it's you working directly on racism or doing something else. And I think that's very important. And I would push people to look at the systems and work against systems and try to drive that change. The last thing that I'll say, and I think this is extremely important right now, is to have grace. Have grace with each other. Have grace with yourself. Just have grace. You don't know what other people are going through. You don't know what other people's experiences are. And you don't know it all. And that's the bottom line, no matter where you're coming from. So please have grace with yourself. Have grace with others. You're having the most difficult conversations that you could have. You're feeling the most complex emotions, in my opinion, that some humans can feel. And that's not going to be easy, no matter how smart you are, because it's hard.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Okay. Our next panelist is Danielle Ramirez. And Danielle is part of the staff in our school. She's an academic program coordinator. I don't see her on the picture here, but I saw her name. So I think, Danielle, you're here. If you are, can you unmute and also unmute your video, open up your video? Okay, so it appears Danielle is not here. All right.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Great. Okay.
Looks like my phone was not. Hold on one second. Okay, always have a backup plan. So my phone was not behaving, so now I'm on the laptop.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Amakuzi Kennedy, for inviting me to this panel of very impressive and intimidating people. I'm really happy to be here. It's been a difficult couple of weeks. It's been a particularly difficult day. I spent a couple of hours speaking with about 120 Black and African American staff members today as part of the GRIO group, and we were very candid and very open about what we're all feeling. So forgive me if I start weeping a little bit. It might come to that.
That's fine.
So my perspective from this is emotional. It's very emotional for me. And I realize that I have a lot of privilege considering where I came from and what I look like. And I think it's really important at this time to step back and really listen to what everyone is feeling and let them express themselves and really try to do that work for them. So my background, I come from New York. I came from a very multicultural neighborhood to Haitian parents, and I can't say I experienced a single day of racism there, although I was a child. I didn't even have any white friends until about 6th grade, and then we were all the same. Puerto Rican, Chinese, white, Black, we were all the same. And then I moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and that was a really eye-opening experience. And there was Black and there was white, and that was it. So it was really hard to kind of find my footing there. But still, I was friends with everyone. I was told numerous times I was not an N-word. I was a Black person, as I'm sure some of you have heard before in a similar way, as if we're somehow different. And in Stone Mountain High School, there was probably a racial fight about once a week. And I was punk rock girl, so most of my friends were white. And then one day, the sort of chief punk rock girl comes to me and says, "So whose side are you on?" And that's something that comes back to me 30 years later, thinking about that. And every time something like this happens, I'm reminded more and more that whether I listen to Radiohead or Beyonce or both, which I do, we're all family. You know, every single Black person in this world is my family. Breonna Taylor is my niece, and Ahmaud Arbery is my brother. George Floyd is my uncle. And I think most of us feel that way. And so beyond being scared for our lives, for our families in the street, we are really genuinely mourning for people. And every time it happens, we carry that hurt with us. And not only that, we're going into our offices, we are putting on happy faces, and we are continuing with our jobs. And we're not able to express it. We become angry Black people if we say anything about it. A lot of people are tired of hearing about racism. And so we are alone in many ways, and we carry it every single day. And that's something that I think that we should all keep in mind, especially in times like this, that we are all suffering and not letting anyone know. And that's something I took away from the conversation this morning, that there was finally a place for us to talk to each other and for us to really let go. But in a space like this, I, as a staff person, I'm afraid to be totally open and to say exactly what I feel. And I'm really glad that we have students here and alums and faculty so that we can speak more openly about this. But I also think that that togetherness that we have when we are having a national mourning is also, on the flip side, we're sharing in each other's success. So every time there's a positive outcome, every time there's progress, we're celebrating that with each other too. And I look forward to having more of that. And it could be age speaking, because I see that a lot of young people are making fantastic progress, but I feel a little hopeless. I mean, it's been, 6 years since Ferguson? That was a big protest too. What has changed? Is there accountability now? And so I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic, and I just hope to make positive change in small ways every single day. That's about as much as I can do right now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you. We appreciate that. So we are going to go next to Jorge Macedo, who is an assistant professor in the school.
Thank you, Agio. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you well.
Perfect.
We don't see you well, but we hear you well.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
See you enough.
So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to actually share some thoughts. I think that, when I watched that video, it was one day I was with my wife and we watched it and we were shocked as human beings. So it was devastating. It was, I would say, a mix, many feelings. It's like you cannot do anything. You can just, I would say, see that it's happening. So that is a very, it's very frustrating, I would say. Now, I'm originally from Peru, so I've lived most of my life in South America, in Peru and other places. So I can say that racism is not only, I would say, it's everywhere. I would say it's a global problem. It's happening in many places. When I was living in South America, I've witnessed that. I've also experienced that myself. In Peru, I grew up in the mountains, so it's when you move to the capital, you can experience these sort of things, because capital is, I would say, sees the people from the mountains in a different way. So then I moved to the United States. That was in 2013. So I started to learn the culture, and I would say it's not immediately obvious what are the problems that are happening here in America. And that may be one of the issues, because to actually be aware of everything that is going on, sadly something like that has to happen. So something very, very, very sad. So I think the only probably positive thing of this is that now people is really concerned about that. They are talking. This is kind of, I think, offering a momentum for actually try to change things. And I do agree. It's more a system problem. There was someone else that was commenting before that's a system problem. I do agree. I do think also that we as educators, we have a tremendous responsibility. So I don't think there is evil in a human being when a human being is born. I think there is something in the culture, there is something in the society that is contributing to actually these issues that we have. So we as educators, we know, I'm assistant professor at Georgia Tech, so in my group I have a variety of different cultures. So I think we have the responsibility to actually convey the message that we all are human beings. We all have the same rights. We have to respect each other, and we have to try to build, I would say, a better community in that way. I think that education is powerful. I do believe in the power of education. Education has, I would say, contributed to everything I have on my life. And I think that there are many, many things, but from our side, we should try to do what we can, and as much as possible. But education has tremendous power. So, yeah, I think this is what I have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jorge. Okay. Our next speaker is Kari Watkins. She's an associate professor in the school.
Thank you, Ajo. I'm going to set a timer also because I am a talker, just like other folks have acknowledged on the call. So maybe some context of why I believe that Ajo asked me to be one of the people on the panel. I am the wife of a Black man and the mother of two biracial daughters. I think it's funny that at one point Ajo had actually asked me if I was biracial because she had met my husband at the same time that she met me. And I think many other people would actually have no idea that I'm part of a biracial couple necessarily. So what that means is I, as a white woman, have a lot of lived experience with the consequences of racism. I've tried to rent apartments with my husband where over the phone, when I was the one talking, they were perfectly willing to rent to us. And when we showed up at the door, we were no longer let in to even see the apartment. I have been pulled over with my husband and asked if I was okay because I was a white woman in the South sitting next to a Black man in a car by a white cop. So I've had these kinds of situations myself. And I've heard many stories of things that have happened to my husband. I'll tell you that actually more than George Floyd, the recent story that, and I might start crying too, so Danielle, thanks for being the first to admit that. The story that resonated the most in our household was actually Christian Cooper. For any of you, in light of all the big stories that have been hitting the news, you might not have actually caught this one, but this was a Black man who was walking in Central Park, and there was a white woman whose dog was off leash, and he was a birder. I believe he's even like the president of the Audubon Society, something like that. And he asked this woman to put her dog on a leash, and her reaction to that was appalling in ways that I think in our household hit just as hard as the death of an individual like George Floyd. And that may be because after years and years, there's been a lot of George Floyds, and as much as we'd love to impact policing policy and such, I don't know that people in our household can. But I know a lot of women like the one who reacted the way she did to Christian Cooper, and I think it's absolutely disgusting. And I have a husband who is a rule follower so that he doesn't end up like George Floyd. But yet he can end up in situations like Christian Cooper by no fault of his own. He can literally be doing everything right, and he still ends up in that position. And I think about this with our own students, how unfair it is that these students have to live in fear of speaking up when there is an issue that they are facing, because they are not sure that the individual they're speaking to is going to understand their perspective. I have a husband who would never have said what Christian Cooper did. He would have just let the dog interrupt what he was doing in his day because he would have been afraid to say something. And so on a personal level, the people in my household are trying to do what we can to educate, because my household is one of educators. We've done some things to start a book club. We have a lot of white friends, so we feel like this is a way that we can actually start to open up dialogue. So we're doing various things in that realm. But I ask myself on this call, the most important thing I think is to talk about what we as civil engineering can do. And so in the last 30 seconds, I want to throw some stats at you that I think are also appalling. The college graduation rate for a 6-year completion rate of a 4-year institution across the United States for whites is 65%, for blacks is 39%. When students graduate from college, 21% of black individuals have to default on their loans, whereas only 4% of whites do. Blacks carry much more debt than whites do when they graduate from college, and then once they do, they earn 73.4 cents on every dollar for what a white individual does. And that's my I'm going to take just one more half a minute, maybe.
That's fine.
I think it's really sad that my husband was joking that I am the second blackest individual in the civil engineering department among the faculty by virtue of being married to him. And that's pretty appalling. And so I think the biggest problem that I would like to start trying to address is fixing the pipeline so that Ajo is not the only black professor in the department, because I think we're never going to be able to protect students so that they feel that they can be open in these kinds of situations and voice their opinions and such until we have more people who are representative of the population around us. And so we need to figure out how to fix K through 12 pipeline into our university, how to fix undergrads feeling that they should be like Victoria and become grad students, how to help grad students like Victoria be supported so that they feel like they can go into academia and be the next Ajo. And that would be my pledge, is that's what I plan to start working on. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kari. Our next speaker is Rahim Baya. He is Vice President of Research. So he's coming to us with from the institute level, but also he is a professor in electrical and computer engineering. Rahim, I saw Rahim a second ago.
I am here.
Wonderful.
All right, Ajo, thank you, and Don so much for the invitation. I have worked with Don for you and Don for many years, and anytime you ask, I assure you I will come. As I think about George Floyd, and I think Jacob actually said this very well, this is not new.
Yeah.
Right. So this is something that we have lived with our entire lives. This is yet another instance of a black man being killed for essentially no reason. Right. So this is not new. And I tell you, I tried my best because this one felt different. I think most folks I've talked to, that this one, it stung so much more. To the point where I've not watched the video. I'm not watching the video. I have zero interest in it because I can't take it. I cannot do it. I don't want to do that. I felt good. One of my mentees, a white male, called to check on me a few days ago, and I said, man, he said, how'd you holding up? I said, to be honest, um, I have tried my best to avoid this as much as possible. I've coped by avoiding until I couldn't. Um, so how am I? I mean, the real answer, my sort of standard answer when these things happen is, I'm fine. I keep on going. And as we say, we wear that mask, and we have been doing it for many years. But the real answer, the transparent answer is, I am beyond frustrated and I am beyond exhausted. Like that is the real answer. But I've been here before. I've been beyond frustrated and been beyond exhausted. And so I say to my friends who ask, I said, look, colleagues, that's the real answer, but I will be fine and my family, we will be fine. Now, I'll give you a little context. I grew up in Atlanta. I'm one of the few natives. And it's interesting. Atlanta is number one for social immobility. And what that means, if you're born in poverty, you will essentially die in poverty. And I was one of the few people, very lucky folks, to escape the braces of poverty and not having a lot in this area. And what's crazy is that is sort of sit on top of this fact that we're one of the number one places, Georgia, to do business. And it's like, how do you reconcile those two, right? But that's where we are. My introduction to what it would be like to be a black man was when I was about 12 years old, the same age that Tamir Rice was when he was killed in Cleveland by just playing with a toy gun. I was riding with some cousins of mine, and we were heading to McDonald's, like a mile away or something like that, and we were pulled over by the police, and they harassed us, detained us, had drugs in their hands and said, I know this is yours, you need to confess, and all sorts of crazy. And I was 12, right? And that was sort of the beginning of realizing that, oh my goodness, this is very different. This is going to be a very different world. Now, I chose to attend HBCU for college because I didn't want to experience racism in conjunction with this really hard engineering program. Like, that's why I chose it, right? When I was in college, I'll tell you a few stories that'll be brief. I came down to hang out with one of my buddies here at Tech on campus, and we were walking through campus. We actually called the little shuttle service because it was late to come pick us up, and they could, I guess, tell that we were black men. I guess probably by the way my friend was talking, and they said, no, we're not going to pick you up. It's too late. We said, well, you don't close till 1 a.m. It's 12:15. Can you come pick us up? No. So we started to walk through campus, and guess what? GTPD pulls up, and next thing you know, we were up against the wall. We were being searched, all these sorts of things. And he apparently was penalized for that. He got some sort of punishment as a result. And by the way, I was told never to come back on campus again, but I guess I'm back, right? So that was my first interaction with GTPD. By the way, the same friend was a really bright guy. Told me, and his name's Neil. He wouldn't mind me sharing that. He used to tell me stories about tech faculty. This was, again, I was at A&T, and it was one class, I think it was physics or calculus, he had gotten the highest score. He would always sit in the front, and the professor would literally go and say, well, wait a minute, I'm looking for Neil, and just look all over him. And he said, no, I'm right here. And the professor just knew it couldn't be him. And it took him a while, and then he finally came back and was like, okay, well, it's him. So I believe with Kari, I think in addition to getting more faculty involved, that our faculty have to have the same expectations for our brown students, our black students, that they do for everyone else. I have my own experiences, as a student here at Tech. I remember when I was doing my master's, and I was taking it was a really hard, really difficult math class, and I was going to tutorial with, actually I was there, was another guy, it was a Turkish guy that was in front of me. And I overheard the conversation, and I said, oh, well, he's asking similar questions. So I asked the professor, I said, hey, do you mind if I sit in so you don't have to repeat these? It's the same problem set. So he said, sure, come on in. And so the professor said, all right, well, he explained the concept, then he asked a question. The guy didn't know it, and I said, oh, well, can I answer it? And I answered it. Again, another explained the concept. He asked a question to the student, did he know it? And then I said, oh, can I answer it? So I answered it. We did this a couple more times, and the professor said, listen, wait a minute, do you understand? The student said no. And he said, you still don't understand? No. I explained it so well that even he could understand. and you don't understand, right? So this is the kind of stuff that happens all across campuses. I mean, all across the country at different campuses. This is not just at Georgia Tech, but this is sort of things that we experience as Black students. So I hear these stories and they resonate. When I started at GT as a faculty member, one thing I will say, I've had an amazing time at GT, and I've been treated very well by my colleagues. A lot of Black faculty oftentimes are alienated, they're isolated. Folks don't want to work with them, but I've never been in that condition, in that situation, and I really do appreciate that. That's one thing I'll say that's positive. But I tell you, when I first started my career, I would go to conferences, and I would hate to go because we would go to the reception, and I would go and try to sit at tables with people, and they would look at you like, "No, you're not welcome." And I would go to the next table, "You're not welcome." And it's like my own academic community. I would come home and tell my wife, "I hate these conferences." And that's what I needed to do to be successful. And so what do? You deal with it, you go, and you keep on moving, right? And that's exactly, what I did. But it was terrible. I mean, fortunately now I got a reputation. Everybody's like, "Hey, it's Rahim, it's a black guy, But starting out, it was not fun. It was terrible, and I don't exaggerate. A few other quick points. Jacob, I'll one up you on the ID story. I was asked as a faculty member in my office to show my ID by a GT police officer. And to put it in perspective, my office, and this was years ago, is the size of a bathroom. So I was sitting there with a suit on, talking about technical material, with a door cracked so you could see everything in my little tiny office, and he was out there for about 10 minutes. And he came into my office and said, show me ID. Now he had reason to be there. I mean, he definitely had cause to be there. I was dialing 919 to go to the North Carolina number, and I dialed 911. It's like, oh, why isn't I? I hung up, and I dialed, so he came, which is good. But you were outside my office for 10 minutes. You listened to my entire technical conversation. You saw me in a suit. And you came in, by the way, with your hand on gun and said, show me ID. So I showed him my ID and told him to leave my office immediately. But that's the stuff that we deal with, right? I have made so many decisions based on how I've been treated and my family have been treated in this country. Where I went to undergrad. I chose A&T because I was really afraid to come to Georgia Tech. Where I live in Southwest Atlanta, so I can jog, right? So I can walk, so I can go to the mailbox. And what are the consequences of that? For example, I live in an area that's in Southwest Atlanta. It's surrounded by concentrated poverty, right? And I love Swatch, and I'm going to be here. But what that does is your property value it does not rise. Essentially, it will depreciate, and the schools are not great. So what happens? I don't have a lot of equity in my house, and I send my kids to private school. I don't have the luxury of going and living in downtown Decatur, sending my kids to public school and getting 100K equity, every 5 years. I don't have that and that wealth to pull down to pass down to my kids because I want to be able to jog, right? You would think that power would change things. When I became the interim chair of ECE, I had, a direct report that decided that individual would, and I won't give you the gender, that to undermine me. I mean, just literally in meetings would sit there, and I've been in meetings with this person for a year before that, and have seen how they interacted with the former chair, and it wasn't that way, right? So even with power, that's right. So many macroaggressions. That's about 5%. I can talk for the next 2 hours. Unfortunately, that is the light stuff that I've shared with you. So how do we fix it? In a sustainable way, I don't know. I really don't. I don't know, and I don't know if we can. I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful that we will fix it. What I do know is that it will take significant sacrifice, and that's going to be by the majority. It's going to be sacrificed by white people. They will have to decide that it is time to change, and that they will sacrifice to do this. Business as usual is not compatible with social progress. So if we want to change, if we want to have more black faculty in civil engineering, something significant will have to change as a result. That will have to happen. The last thing I'll say is I've had lots of friends and colleagues that come to me and say, hey, well, what should we, what do I do to help? I want to help, and I'm thankful for that, and I appreciate that. But the one thing that I give them some things, but the one thing that I say is that you also need to do the work, right? You have to do the work. It is not, Google is out there. When I have students that come to me, if you come in my office, hey, Rahim, Dr. Bia, I want to work with you. And by the way, what do you do? That makes it very clear that this student really has zero interest in what I do and we want to work with me, and they just want like a GRA. And so the same thing that happens, I expect that student to go to my website, look at my papers, look at my areas, do their homework, and then come to me. So when it comes to social progress, do the work and have, really sort of strong and candid conversations with colleagues. And I'm done. I should have set a timer.
Okay, thank you very much, Rahim. And thank you very much. And our next speaker is Steve McLoughlin, who is the Dean of the College of Engineering.
Thank you so much, Ajo. Thank you to everybody. I really hope I have something to add to the conversation. I can't thank everyone enough. Danielle and Kari, my brother always says we come from a long line of crying McLoughlin men. And so I can't promise that I'm going to get through this because I would say essentially everything that I've learned about race has come through my son. And what I realized when I said his picture of him right in the back there, he's 21 now. And almost everything that I've learned about race happened right around the time he turned 12 and beyond. He's a young man of color. He's Latino, was born in Guatemala. We adopted him when he was a baby. And I would say life was as expected for maybe as a typical white kid would experience up until about 12 or 13. And then we started to experience certain things. So I just want to touch on 3 things. First, the George Floyd video for me was playing out everything I was deathly afraid of and talked to my son about for those years after him being 12 or 13 and having that conversation and seeing that cop with his knee on his throat is an image I had about my son for the last 10 years. And seeing that was just so incredibly painful because I'd imagined that happening to my son and had prepared him for that moment. I think the second thing is around, I have some appreciation for what so many young men of color experience around you don't belong. I can't tell you at least 100 times when my wife and I are with our son or if I'm with my son. And, the typical story was and still is, the 3 of us, we show up to sit down at dinner, show up to the host or whomever. And the 3 of us are clearly standing there and people say table for 2 and that he's totally invisible to so many people. And I've seen that and I've experienced that at least 100 times where we're together and some people are earnestly trying to figure it out why this 50-something white guy is with a teenage Latino young man. Clearly they don't look anything alike. I know what's going through their head. They can't figure it out, and almost always they take my order and tell me how much I owe them. And then when I say, but my son's going to order too. Those moments I don't get mad anymore. I realize I'm giving them a gift. I'm giving them a gift mostly because this is what a family can look like. This is what a family can look like and does look like. And I think the third thing is around, and I said I don't get mad. The times where I've been spitfire. I mean, I think I know some of you on. I know many of you on the panel, and I think you probably find me to be a pretty calm, and genuinely nice guy, nice person, kind of level-headed. I have a reputation for that. The times where I've been spitfire furious, pretty sure I could, you kill the person that's in front of me, or the times where I know that that person is saying or acting or thinking something racist about my son. And that fury is just, and I've experienced that maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times. And so, that for the young men, I think I view it through the lens of my son. For the young men of color who experience those microaggressions on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, who have grace, who have grace, and I think, as maybe Rahim put it, are able to put on the mask. I don't have that grace. I don't have that grace. The fury that I feel in that moment, I'm truly overwhelmed at how so many young men of color, anyone of color, can get through that moment with such grace. I don't have because I've experienced those moments of fury through my son, and I don't have anywhere close to the life experience of so many people on this. I think, in terms, my role of dean of the college, I think the only thing I'm going to say is my pledge to my colleagues, my pledge to everyone on the call, that I'm determined to not let this moment pass. You have my pledge. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. Okay, so I want to take this opportunity to really thank the panel for sharing candidly, on these tough issues we are discussing. It's time for us now to open it up, and so if you have a question, you have something you want to share, you have something you want to respond to from one of our panel members, this is the time to do it. I think it would work well if you can just simply type, if you have a question, if you can type question into the chat box or reflection or follow up, and then Don is responsible for the chat box, so he's going to be just ushering people in one after the other. If you feel it's more comfortable just to unmute and talk, let's try that, because I'm looking at the chat box as I'm talking and there's nothing in the chat box. Okay. We just had something come in, and it says, what is Georgia Tech or CEE doing admissions-wise to make our student population actually look like Georgia or Atlanta? Atlanta is a majority Black city, and Georgia is 32% Black, but our Black population is only around 9%. This is something we current students can't really control, but the relative lack of diversity makes BIPOC feel marginalized and just reinforces the education injustice that dates back many, many decades. I also think this is something that Georgia Tech can change in the short term. Thanks for the concern. So this is one of our students, I'm guessing. So can we have someone respond to that? Yes, this person says, I am a rising third-year environmental engineer. So we have, and Steve, I'm sorry to have to ask you to step in if you can, or we also have our chair here. So Dawn, you may step in, or any of our other administrators.
Yeah, I guess I can start, and others can share as well. Um, at the school level, we have very little control of the undergraduate admissions. I know that they're very cognizant of the populations that they admit. I agree with you. The population differences between our own student population and the surrounding community are quite stark. At the graduate level, I'm sorry to say it's even worse. The 9% number that's quoted here, the number for graduate students is actually quite a bit lower. We did something new this year, and that was to really target potential students of color. There's a mechanism to actually get names from the GRE board of students who identify by various races. We also targeted female students to try and increase the applicants in that pool as well. But students that have taken the GRE and have scored in a way that's consistent with our entrance and are people that we've reached out to by email to encourage them to apply. Our application pool each year is much smaller than we want it to be. So I think the place to start is to really increase that population pool. And then the final thing I'll say is I think the point that was raised earlier by Jacob and maybe some others, we have a very small number of faculty members who are Black. Dr. Amakuzi Kennedy is the only one on our faculty currently who is Black. Dr. DeRoche left 3 years ago, and we had one other faculty member who left about 7 years ago. Each year that applicant pool is incredibly incredibly small. So we need to really increase the number of applicants who are interested to come to Georgia Tech and be faculty members and educate our students and serve as role models and diversify our community. So that's a huge challenge that we face going forward.
Can I just add on to that? And it's not exactly my place to speak to admissions at all, but I do think there is something pretty important to just note. One, this is crazy, right? Like we're sitting here talking about how bad these numbers are at Georgia Tech, and here's the craziest part. Georgia Tech is a crazy success story in the sense that we graduate more Black engineers than any other school in the country, or at least that was the case when I was there. So imagine how bad it looks at Georgia Tech when you look around and you see a lack of diversity, and this is the best when it comes to engineering. So that's one, and it's not to say that we should rest on our laurels. No, it's to say we have a lot of work to do, but also realize that as you look around, we are ahead of everybody else, and that's how bad the situation is. And with that, the second thing I would say is, I work for the mayor, and everybody wants the mayor to solve problems, right? And y'all go to Georgia Tech, so you want the dean or you want the president to solve problems. But the thing I mentioned before around systems and institutions, the problem, here's my opinion, this is going to sound bad, but once somebody's made it to Georgia Tech, they've already succeeded, right? And the fact is very few Black and brown people in America are having the opportunity to go to a school like Georgia Tech. So I would encourage students to push faculty, push leadership, but I would also encourage students to say, hey, are you in high schools around Georgia Tech, around Atlanta? Are you in middle schools, elementary schools around Atlanta, trying to make sure that these people are making it through high school, that the people are making it into college, and just realizing that if you sit there and talk to Georgia Tech at that level, we may have already missed the train. So it's not a look at leadership type question, in my opinion. It's everybody has a part to play, and that's what I mean by being anti-racist and doing the work, no matter what your life goal is or what your occupation or what your status or anything is.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick just to add, because I have a slightly different take on the numbers. So when we talk about the numbers, it's a bit misleading because we have large numbers partly because we're large, right? So if we want to have a serious conversation about race, we need to talk about percentages. And when we look at percentages, we're just fine. We're not great in terms of number of faculty and all sorts of things. So for marketing perspectives, hey, look, that's cool. I'll mark it. It's all good. But when we have internal reflection, we need to look and say, from a percentage perspective, can we be doing better and should we be? But I agree.
I would also like to add that I've been in civil engineering for about a year and a half. And since I've started, we are looking at numbers of underrepresented minorities and women, and we are actively reviewing our own internal biases and working to get beyond that. And it's actually one of our tasks today as we step away from STEM activities today is to look at least in the Graduate Student Services Office, to look at ways where we can recruit more Hispanic and Latin American and African American students. So it's something we are aware of and we're working on.
Excellent. Yeah, more questions. So
Actually, let me, Aja, I'll just say just a couple things. I don't have too much to add on the admission side. I think, believe it or not, we are, I think, on a better trajectory maybe than in the last couple of years in terms of faculty hiring. Again, we will be hiring 13 faculty this year. 8 are either women or underrepresented minorities. None are African American. Because of the hiring freeze, we lost 2 and probably 3 African American faculty that we were in the midst of negotiating with. We were, I'd say, on the verge of a really absolute banner year for faculty hiring this year. Unfortunately, we didn't get as far as we wanted. I think the number of other initiatives, just Next Prof Next is something we joined to try to significantly find different ways to connect to underrepresented PhD students, postdocs. I think the other, and changing the subject a little bit because someone asked the question, what am I doing to protect, what am I doing to protect students of color other than my son? I think honestly, I think the best answer I can give is you see who I am. And I'm trying to find ways all day, every day to do that and have it in my core with whatever understanding I have to all day, every day, protect, defend, listen to, talk with, find ways to support students of color.
and so thank you for that. We are going to Emily Gubert's question. Emily says, beyond individual faculty efforts, do we actively recruit at HBC or grad pools in particular? Have we considered following, oh, it just jumped. Give me a second, let me go back for it. Yes, have we considered following EAS's lead in dropping the GRE for equity reasons? Okay, I don't know if we have John Taylor here, who is our Associate Chair for Graduate Programs. Maybe John, if you're here, you can take that question, or Dawn, maybe. Is John here? Okay, then we'll move to the next question. Is CEE planning on implementing ideas about professors being evaluated on their racial biases mentioned earlier by Victoria?
Yeah, honestly, I'm having a struggle to know how to answer that question because I'm not sure we have a good way to assess that. How would we actually determine that what's being implied there about racial biases? I'm not sure. Maybe you can suggest something that would be helpful around that.
I could possibly say something. Isabel could also jump in. I think that individuals that experience racial biases, it's very clear to them when they're experiencing racial biases. So I believe if the option is there to provide that feedback, I think it is as clear to provide feedback on that as it is about whether or not there was too much work assigned or, how often we showed up to class. There are blatant things. The allies and peers of those students that are experiencing the racial biases, it is also evident to them. So even if you only have one Black student in the class, like many of my classes, I think that my friends oftentimes are more enraged by things that I experience than even I am, because it is my day-to-day experience. So I believe if the option is there, we really take some time to think about it. I think it is plausible to get something clear cut out of that.
So Victoria, you're suggesting perhaps CEOs that related to racial biases in the classroom?
Correct. Yes, racial biases and potentially even other social indicators that aren't top of mind right now. I think valuing social things in the same way that you value things centered around research and grades and different things like that could possibly be something that starts the change that we'd like to see.
Very good. Okay, so I'm going to the next. Are there any? Okay, I think we are going to continue here with the chat box. And okay, so this is from Shauna. Shauna says, thanks, Dr. Baya, for sharing your experiences. I've also experienced the same things when attending our CEAB meetings and trips. I'm the only African American staff member and attendee in these events. It is very difficult to perform my job with a smile. I remember feeling like the hired help, and it saddened and angered me. Okay, then let's go on. We have a comment from Danielle Ramirez. She says, maybe GTC can visit more Black high schools like Westlake, Banneker, Mays, Tri-Cities, offer more scholarships to Black students. Okay. Samuel says, I'd like to echo both Emily's and Victoria's comments about how GRE minimums can inequitably remove candidates from the consideration and apparently outreach pool. Okay, now we have a question. What do you all think faculty's role should be making Black students feel heard and supported? When given the option, professors tend to just continue on as usual without acknowledging these difficult subjects, and I don't personally feel comfortable bringing up these issues on my own. Also, how do we make sure this established safety remains in place when the protests eventually subside and the issue is no longer trending? This is a very good question. This is Zion Martel. So what should faculty's role be in making Black students feel heard and supported? And how do we ensure that when everything subsides, we don't go back to business as usual? We have a lot of faculty on here. I think we counted 100. Yes.
I have one idea, Ajo. I was wondering about, I know Chloe, who I think is on the call, has a ribbon on her door that sort of indicates that if there is a student who needs to come and talk to her about issues related to being I'm trying to, the acronym is not coming in my head right now. I'm so embarrassed. I'm sorry. That maybe there could be something similar where for those of us who are kind of acknowledging that, thank you, LGBTQ, and more letters afterwards, IA, I think, that maybe there could be something similar where for those of us who would be willing to spend time with students who had some sort of racial issue or something like that and needed to just know that there was someone that they could speak to about these things, that there were certain faculty who felt comfortable having students, be willing. Now that assumes we're back in place and in offices and whatnot. The next year could be problematic for these kinds of things, but I think longer term, it might be a way to sort of make at least some people feel more comfortable being able to speak up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
So Kari, if I can jump in here, I think it's not enough. Having a sign on my door never brought me any student to my office to talk about gender issues or sexuality. I got the best talks with students when I was proactive and engaging into mentoring activities or speaking as a panelist, just like you're doing right now. So although I think it's important to be visible, especially in situations where it may not be obvious what kind of identity you are. I think it's important to be visible and to have those signs out and to enforce training. I mean, just to have the opportunity for people who do not experience racism in the same ways to have some kind of grasp of what it feels like and how you can support others. I think it's important to do all that, but I think it's also important to do more and to actually go towards students and not only wait for them to come to our offices, because it's hard. It's just hard to go through the door. It's just hard to go and talk to somebody you don't know. It might be a bit easier if you're somebody they see often at events. In my case, that would be the LGBTQ center. If they see me often, then maybe they will talk to me because they see me often and they know me.
Yeah, so I think that's those are really good thoughts. So maybe one of the things we can think about is maybe we can get a little creative and figure out programs in which we can interact more regularly with the students. For example, I'm thinking about if there were opportunities, set up opportunities to take students out to lunch every few weeks. I would like to do that. I mean, if we could find some funds to do that, and so I could see some kind of mentoring, because I have to eat lunch anyway. So why not have some students over, and students could sort of sign up, and maybe some faculty may want to do that. So we can think about some of these things, I think, as we move forward. And then we could also think about peer-to-peer mentoring. We use some of those approaches in the leadership minor, and I think it works quite well, so that where the faculty is in contact with some students, and then the students also can have group or peer-to-peer kinds of interactions on in a committed way, and so I think these are some of the things, perhaps Kari and others we can sit down and think about, and maybe roll out.
Kari is already doing that for female students in the department.
Yes, at the graduate level.
Right,
and
JT started organizing events as well for students. And I think with the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion that's being created in the school, we'll have a more structural way to organize similar events. Mentoring, I think, is a great idea. I think it's generally easier for people to talk in small, like on a one-to-one basis. So I really like that idea to perhaps try to have a structure in place to facilitate that.
So these are some of the things we can.
Yeah, and I'll just say really quickly, I mean, I want to remind the students and also my colleagues on the call. So we're here to work. We work for the students. We are here for you. That's why we're here, right? So let that sink in. We are here to serve you. We are a service organization. That's why we're here, right? That's our mission. So if you feel like you need to communicate, you need to speak up. You should speak to the chair of the department if you don't feel like you can talk to the faculty member. I completely understand if you don't feel comfortable doing that. Feel free to reach out to me. I have no problem doing that. For years, me and many other Black faculty have had this sort of behind the scenes network where we have addressed many issues that have from students and also faculty recruiting. So. And then I can also say things like, well, I know Don Webster very well, and I know him, and I know his heart, I know his intentions, and I know he will absolutely speak with you and do the right thing. So reach out to me, reach out to some other Black faculty, other faculty that you feel comfortable talking to, and we will help you. But don't ever feel like you can't communicate, because that is not true. And I don't care if I got at 3 a.m. on Sunday, I will respond to your email and make sure that we address your issue.
One thing, if I can add to that, just also commenting in some of the other comments, I want to echo what was said about presence on whether it's panels or how you show up in the classroom every day, which is why I think it's really important to add these social aspects to the end of semester surveys or what have you. In thinking about my committee, I have 3 non-Black members on my committee that I feel very, very seen by. Dr. Watkins on the call here today is one of those individuals. I feel like I could comfortably say that. My advisor, Dr. Gruber, I feel like I feel comfortable stating things and have stated things about my identity and how I feel in being in my skin. So I think that's important. A point brought up by Alex about putting pressure on Black students to advocate for themselves. I agree with that. There are spaces within my department that I feel extremely uncomfortable saying something because of microaggressions that have been made in the past. And so I think that, that's why it's important for professors, or again, going back to huge changes having to be made if you really want a huge impact to take place. And that's why I think it's on the pressure. But in the meantime, obviously, we know who we could go to should certain issues arise.
We got you back.
Right. There was a very nice question on ethics here, and then it got lost. This chat box is tricky. When you are checking it out, then it just jumps when people type. So I lost the question. Somebody asked a question on ethics. Who was that? About the curriculum. Do you think you can unmute and ask that question? Because I thought that would, here it is. Eli Derrington. Okay. He says, has there been any consideration of overhauling the curriculum's ethics requirement offerings to incorporate anti-racism as well as combating other forms of discrimination? And we may not have the people here who can answer that question, but I thought it's an important question. Any in particular? Yes.
Only thing I would add to that is I would just challenge the faculty in civil engineering and in other schools and in their degree programs to find a place to address racism, sexism, LGBTQIA issues. There are a list of demands from students that are out there, and maybe many have seen them, one of which is a kind of a core curriculum course on ethics, race, and related topics. And so there isn't room in almost all of our curriculums to add another class. And so what I really challenge the faculty is to find a way to do it, because it's absolutely needed.
Okay, so we have a comment here from John Kuhn. John Kuhn says, to increase the number of African American students at Georgia Tech, shouldn't we also be working to increase the size of the applicant pool rather than just trying to attract more of the existing applicant pool? So I'm not sure I understand the question fully. John, are you there? Do you care to elaborate, please? Can you unmute?
Sure. Seems to me to increase African American students at Georgia Tech, you got to start early. You got to start elementary school, maybe. The students need tutors. They need to be encouraged to take the math and the science. That if they don't start taking elementary school or high school, they're not going to be successful at Georgia Tech. In addition, let's say there are a certain number of students out there that have the background and the interest at the time they're going to college to go to Georgia Tech. And if we try to get more of those students, there are not going to be any more African Americans in STEM careers. It's only by increasing that pool, it seems to me, that we really start to solve the problem. Not by just getting a bigger fraction of the existing pool could be good, because our education at Georgia Tech, we believe, is a very good one. But the better good, it seems to me, would be to increase the size of the pool, the potential number of African Americans that can go and have the interest in the background to go into STEM careers. Does that
Very good.
explain it?
Yes, yes, that's very clear. Anybody want to talk? So I'm thinking that we need to have more STEM outreach programs, 8 to 12 STEM outreach programs, and perhaps that's something we can think
Yes.
about when we write proposals and put that on as just as a matter of course, as part of that. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to this.
No, I think that's a fair point. But I want to make sure that we're careful to not to defer to the pipeline issue. If you look at dual degree has dropped off over the years, right? How much time do we spend over in the AU Center? Very very little, right? So now we have lots of other folks that are all our students from AU, from Morehouse and Spelman are going to Michigan and other places, right? So I would push back and say until we know that what we have now is saturated, then I don't buy the pipeline argument. I really don't buy that argument because I'm not convinced that we've saturated. So, for example, Victoria is here with us. If she doesn't have a good experience, people are going to know that, and they're not going to apply to Georgia Tech. So part of what we can do is make sure that she and other students have an excellent and outstanding experience and they feel welcome. So a lot of students are just not even coming to us because of the poor way that our students are being treated. So there's so many things that can be done before we go to the pipeline concern. And I just want to make sure we exhaust those things before we do that.
Very good points.
Do we need this recognized some way in the strategic plan that's being put together?
Yes.
You want me to take this? This is the civil. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes. Well, you can speak to the Institute strategic plan as well, Rahim.
No, I can speak to the COE strategic plan. That's
COE.
something that has been very important. That's very front and center in the COE strategic plan that Steve was not willing to negotiate on, right? So increasing numbers, increasing partnerships, and really having sincere growth and diversity. So I don't know what's going on locally at Civil, but I know from the COE perspective, we spent a lot of time, being guided by Steve on how do we do a better job of increasing numbers.
Don, did you want to speak to that question, or anybody else?
The only thing I'll add is at the institute level, and folks probably know that the institute level strategic plan is coming together. We're in the kind of final stages of phase 2, which is pulling together goals, the goals tied to the first phase, the visioning, and I will say all of these issues are absolutely front and center in several of the task groups, and I'm very, very optimistic that some ambitious goals will be coming out of the President Cabrera's strategic plan.
Okay, we have another question here, and it's from Maria Warren. She says, after Scout's death, a transgender student killed by campus belief pronoun they. Georgia Tech, I don't know if that some words were missing there. It says Georgia Tech has many emails, statements, and committees to address rights of transgender students. However, in a class I was just in, a GT administrator spoke on the topic in a very unconcerned tone and without the correct language. I could see something parallel happening with supporting students of color. I know as an institution, GT may have carefully crafted messages around diversity, but what are we doing about the individual mindsets of faculty and administrators? I don't know if there's someone here to speak to it.
Probably the expectation is that every faculty, the assumption is that every faculty is going to have the right mindset, and that is I would say it's an assumption. So probably that has to be actually not only assumed, but actually a culture that actually checks that should be motivated within the institute. Because to me, that is an assumption. I think that everyone is assuming that faculty is going to take care of the students, which I think is going to be in most of the cases, but should be not only assumed.
Okay, so Christian Brennan says anti-racism training will be a great start for faculty. Robert Simon says recruitment, in addition to the measures mentioned by Don, JT, Danielle. Oh, this is a conversation, right? So, because I don't think we have the background for that. Okay, so let me move on to.
Adjo, if
yes.
I can just interject, going back to Maria's question,
Yes.
I can say that there's a program on campus that Pearl Alexander and Cheryl Cofield started a few years ago. It's called the Inclusive Leaders Academy, and they have both a faculty track and a staff track. Although the cohorts actually interact quite a bit, so I don't really think it's a separation. It's just the way you enter into the program, the way you apply more than anything. I did the program 2 years ago, and I found it outstanding. And so, and I know a couple of our faculty colleagues have done it last year and then this year. So for all the faculty on the line, I would encourage you to look into that. It's called the Inclusive Leaders Academy, and usually the call for applications comes around November or December timeframe, and the program runs in the spring. So it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, excellent. And I see here another note on that. It says the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond does exceptional trainings, and we have the link there. Okay, so I think there are some parallel conversations going on in the chat that are quite interesting. Okay, here comes another question. We have a question from Nida Mohammadi, and she says part of the admission process into graduate programs, particularly at the PhD level, is the recruitment decisions by individual faculty. How is CEE planning to encourage the faculty to reevaluate their personal recruitment decision criteria, taking into account department strategies such as dropping the GRE requirements moving forward? So I think maybe that's a JT question. I don't know if JT is on here.
And I had responded to Emily Grubert's question that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. That we have been discussing the possibility of dropping the GRE, but there's a lot of history there in the graduate committee. No decisions have been made. As far as individual recruitment decisions by faculty, it's a good point to bring up. What we did do this past year, Don mentioned that we specifically targeted recruiting of underrepresented minorities and female students that met our GRE score requirements. Second round thing we did is when we had our visitation day, we went through the pool of people who weren't invited and identified 8 or 10 students that were not invited but were promising candidates, and went to the faculty and asked them if they could think again about these students and would they be willing to post them, and in most cases they were, and I believe that led to a few additional student GRA offers.
Very good. Okay, so we have a comment here from Aris Georgiakakos. He says, by its location, GT has an excellent opportunity to engage HBCUs like Morehouse, etc. But this requires an institutional and financial commitment.
Yes. So, what I was saying is that, we have a huge opportunity here. Atlanta is the HBC, the Morehouse, and many other traditionally black college universities are all over the place in Atlanta. So, but there has to be an institutional commitment. It's not enough to leave the faculty on an individual basis. For example, we collaborate with Emory because Emory provides, this collaboration is great. why not establish something similar with Morehouse, for example, in areas that make sense. In addition to this, I want to say also that we also have civil engineering in particular has engaged, and we had a huge opportunity with Africa itself. So, but as you know, for example, you're here, and I wish we had the opportunity to collaborate with many more universities. That's possible, and some of our faculty actually do this. But we all know this is not an easy thing. It's a hard thing to do, and it requires institutional commitment and financial commitment. In the past, I think the university may not have been 100% behind such efforts. I wonder with Steve, who definitely, it's clear he feels so strongly about this, and he has been himself traveling around Africa for so long. I wonder if that's the opportunity that we could actually leverage and engage many more students, many more, and increase the pool of people that we can actually bring here. I think it is an opportunity, and I know that Steve agrees with me. Thank you.
Okay, anyone want to respond to that comment? I think that's a good comment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I think at the end of the day, it's going to sound very simple. I think we have to want to do it. And that's essentially what needs to happen. We have to actually really want to do these things. I have lots of friends that are faculty members over there, and honestly, a lot of feedback that I've gotten from them is that Georgia Tech comes when they need to have an HBCU on the proposal, and they come 3 days before. Don't ask for any sort of intellectual contribution, but just sign up so we can get this money. So we don't even come to them in a respectful way. So I completely agree. We need to, do like we do with our colleagues at Michigan and Emory. Hey, I got these great ideas. Let's start having discussions and then let that evolve into something. But unfortunately, historically, I think on average, we haven't engaged in the way that they want to be engaged.
All right.
Go
ahead.
Can I also add that it's not only about being able to bring students here and collaborate. Taking our students to Africa, for example, or does great things. We're talking about getting people to understand and be sensitized to people of different races. Being in a place where you're the only white person and the rest of the people are black does miracles for this. I must tell you from personal experience. I remember my kids when I first took them, as I was working with in Tanzania and Uganda and all. That was an experience they never forgot. And I think it can work in the same way with our students and our faculty. It is a laboratory, it is a field experience, it's something that nobody forgets and stays with you the whole time. So it has many benefits. This engagement in Africa and that I was talking about is something that I feel we are missing out on this opportunity. Yeah, that's all.
Yes. I'm going.
Okay. Oh, you are leaving?
No, I want to go.
You are going to Africa? Is that what you said?
Whatever country in Africa you want, I'm ready to roll. Let's go. Sign me up.
Well, let me tell you then one more thing, if you're interested in this. So as we speak, East Africa in Uganda and Tanzania has unprecedented floods. I mean, floods that have never happened 70 years now. And so as part of my class in water resources, I taught the normal things this semester, but I happened to be working with the ministry there and the cabinet to help them to figure out what to do with these floods, because so every week I was giving some update as to what happens, how the dams operate, what the issues were, all these issues that were going on, and how people try. And I tell you, this was the highlight of the class. I mean, I may have taught optimization, advanced things, but everybody was asking about what's going on in Africa and how are these people doing, and whether this multi-disaster with the floods and the coronavirus, fares out. So I tell you, this is something that is a valuable experience. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, let me pick up. I'm seeing here there are some threads I don't want us to miss. And this one is from Erin Adams. And I'm going to read this, but maybe Erin, you would like to also come on and elaborate. She says, what has not been discussed is the experience of African American and Black staff at GT. This thing is jumping again. Give me a second. Okay. He says, I have been at GT for more than a decade. Over these years, I have been told about, and directly experienced scenarios of extreme disrespect. I'm picking it up below. She says, maybe people haven't outright used the N-word, but perhaps they have undermined, defamed, and or prevented someone from progressing simply because they are Black. The recurring question is, what do I do? In my opinion, the answer is be the change you want to see. It starts with you. If you're committed to change, then change, or it's the only constant. Okay, so I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that or pick up on that thread, because I think this is not the first time we saw it in the chat box.
I guess in answering to experiences, I will say my experiences at Georgia Tech as a grad student were better than my experiences as an undergrad at the University of Texas. That also might be because as a graduate student, you are very tangential anyway by nature, because I came in as a PhD student, so I kind of come in, get what I need, and go back to where I live. I will say in talking about being anti-racist or going over and beyond and not just things being equal, when I came in as originally an environmental engineering PhD student, I was the only Black PhD student that came in at the time. When I came in with no funding, I think an anti or overcompensation method at that point, it would have been nice to be able to get funding from the department. If it's only one Black student, me, that would have been nice to have that. At that point, I think that's a way in which you feel seen and appreciated, of at least being that one. There are like little microaggressions have happened. Someone's asked me like what part of Africa I'm from, which might not seem like a big deal until you have to be like, I actually don't know because of slavery. And also then having that preconceived notion that if you are a Black person that has made it this far into academia, then you probably are a first generation Black person from Africa that has come here, which are two very different lived experiences. And so I don't know, that's one nuanced thing. But yeah, I've been called the N-word at University of Texas at Austin, yelled at, cussed out, had things thrown at me, but not here. So that's great.
Joe, I'd like to comment on this one too, because I think Emily brought up a great point, and this is something that's always bothered me as well, that I think speaks to what Erin was saying, is that we've long had this culture of the professors in the department being referred to as doctor with our last name, whereas we tend to call the staff by their first names. And quite frankly, I prefer to be called my first name. And I've talked to staff members about this before, and they said it's just confusing to know who wants what. But I think it does sort of reinforce this culture that faculty are on one level and staff are on another. And I really hate that, because the staff members, like Erin is the expert at human resources. She deserves as much respect in her role as I deserve in mine as a professor in the department. And so I think moving towards being on a first name basis among the faculty and staff is pretty critical to getting rid of some of these sort of lines that exist.
Yeah. I'll just add on just a thought. I did 2 graduate degrees in the UK. Calling somebody doctor something, even as a student, it's not a thing there. There is a little bit around a professor and a full professorship, but it was a really weird barrier to get over when I moved to the UK. And I honestly, I know that culturally it's something that a lot of the professors at Tech are very proud of. They work very hard for their doctor, but in an institution where you're trying to build relationships and trying to bridge the gap to students, it is a thought around, is doctor always needed?
Yeah, I would say just to put on one last point, and Aaron, I know it's hard, and I know it's uncomfortable, but I think that we are beyond the point where we cannot speak up and tell somebody. I just, for me, I mean, I'm done. Like that line is I am over that line, like for good. I am at an inflection point. So I think you just got to speak up, and you need to speak up to someone who you feel comfortable talking to. I'll leave it at that, and that can be within your department or outside of the department. But you got to speak up. You cannot let it continue to go.
Okay, very good. I feel we have.
Excuse me.
Well, you have it. Sean, please go ahead.
Hey. So I'd just like to say something kind of about I'm not part of the faculty at Tech, but I can't offer too much about how that process is broken down. But I was an RETP student, Regents Engineering Transfer Program student, and this is a program that is tied with Georgia Tech. You have to meet a specific GPA at your previous college, and you have to take a course load that's, recommended by Georgia Tech, and they make sure that those courses are met at the, at the Georgia Tech level criteria. So this program that ties schools to other colleges, I think it creates a simple, incentivized, step-by-step program that allows people who may not have been able to get into tech straight out of high school, who may have been cut off from that pool. I think the tie and connection and seeing previously accepted students who transfer was very inspiring personally for me, and that gave me a huge push of motivation and knowing that it was possible. So I can only imagine how on the high school level that can be very important. So I don't know what the current situation is with going to high schools, or maybe some increasing programs like this that create ties with less competitive high schools would make a difference. Simply seeing like a Black alum come and reach out to you on a more intimate level, I think that can be very impactful. But I get it's a research institute, so you want to increase those odds. But there's a lot of good students out there. So I just wonder, if there's anyone here who can speak on that, that's something I'm curious about. So thanks for listening.
So is there anyone here who is doing some STEM to K-12 outreach? Anyone reaching out into high schools? I know there's some of that going on, but I don't know if there are folks here who can speak to that. Certainly, I think we can do more of that.
Yeah, I'll just speak quickly. And I can't speak to Georgia Tech, and this is a bit of a call to the folks who are on the line, whether they be professors or students. That was something that I was very involved in when I was a student tech. What I found out was that I came to Tech not knowing any of the basics on how you apply for. I went to a library, wrote my application, Georgia Tech, walked away, and never looked twice at it. Never asked anybody to look at it. I had no idea. First person to go to college. So I think, I would encourage people, whether it be, I know there were student organizations on campus that were doing it. I don't think there was that much institutional power behind it, which might be a push to the department. But, there's so many different places. But, I can guarantee you that there are a lot of students who are extremely talented in APS who on paper might even be able to get into Georgia Tech, but don't have the support they need to apply, because the fact is the average person applying to Georgia Tech has 5 people or is paying somebody to look at their application, and it's just hard to measure up to that. So that's just one thought.
Okay, so I'm looking at the time now. It's 7:26. Okay, and I'm not sure whether Blue Jays won't cut us off. So yes, I see there's a question. There's someone starting here. So let's take the last um, contribution, and then we try to pull this together and think about whether this is a series that we want to have on some periodic basis. Okay, so over to you, sir.
Hi, this is William Whipple. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you okay.
Okay, great.
Excuse
I'm not
me
on
one
the
second.
faculty, but I'm a graduate. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm a graduate.
Excuse me,
Can you
just
hear me
one
okay?
second. I want to make sure we are not going to get cut off when it turns 7:30. So do we have Ashley here? Ashley, are we going to have Blue Jeans cut us off at 7:30?
Adjo, hi. I don't believe it will cut us off.
Okay, very good. Please go ahead, sir.
Fantastic. One thing I want to do is encourage the admissions process to consider very creatively the minorities, the people of color, because I can tell you, my guidance counselor in high school helped me with my application, and that was a tremendous help. So that was a great suggestion that I heard. But just in general, just based on the racist incidents that are taking place and the heightened sensitivity to racism that has just continued throughout virtually every domain, the one thing I want to make clear is this. Any process, whether it's the Georgia Tech admissions process, any corporate process, and by the way, getting through the doors of Georgia Tech is not success in my mind. It opens a door to success. My whole career has been dealing with serial racism, so I've succeeded despite, not because, and that's one reason why I run my own company now. But I recall when I was admitted to Georgia Tech, my goal was to graduate at the bottom of my class. I was that intimidated. I got to Georgia Tech, made Dean's List. They read about it in the home newspaper. I realized I had the capability to be not at the bottom, but at the top of my class. When I graduated, my co-op advisor said to me, he said, William, my birth name is Willie, he said, William, we didn't expect you to graduate, man. So I got myself in a situation where I needed to make straight A's my last semester at Georgia Tech to graduate because I pledged fraternity, fell in love, got my heart broken, a lot of crazy stuff. But the bottom line is when I pulled that 4.0 and I had to take 23 hours, which was surprising. I'd never taken 23 hours. My advisor said to me, William, you're going to have to break this up into 2 semesters. And I said, no, I can do it all in 1 semester. He says, you've never done this before. I said, you give me permission to do it, and I'll do it. I pulled it off, and of course, I had a job waiting on me. So my point is that I excelled and exceeded expectations. What we have to do in any process is realize that any time we evaluate or judge whoever's being evaluated with the same criteria that those that have had relative privilege and access the whole while, that perpetuates racism and it disadvantages those people. So what you have to do is be creative. My last semester in high school was one where I aced everything out because I realized, man, I got to do something differently to get into Georgia Tech. And I think that was one big part of it. But you got to be creative because I realized, my advisor said to me when we were graduating and I was walking down the hall, I pulled this 4.0. He was shocked. He goes, do you realize where you could be? I can see it like yesterday. Do you realize where you could be if you'd done this the whole while? And I was like, same place. I still had no clue. So the mentoring is so incredibly important, even with the young kids that come in once they're there, let alone those that are in high school, so that they have a sense of what the possibilities are.
Excellent. Okay, I see it's 7:31, and thank goodness we weren't all kicked off Blue Jeans. I thank you for all your contributions. I think this has been a very good panel. I want to just reiterate some things that different people said. Let me bring it back to what's been going on. Tyndale told us that racism is the problem. Okay, he says police were created to be slave patrols. We need strict standards for accountability. Victoria Dean says it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. Okay. Jacob told us that racism is about systems. Those types of behaviors we see are perpetrated by systems. So we ought to be anti-racist in everything we do. We really have to think about how we change the systems. And then he added, have grace, because we don't know what individuals are going through. Danielle told us to step back and listen to what everyone is feeling. She says we are mourning. She says we are all family. Young people are making progress. Jorge Macedo told us that there's no evil in a human being when a human being is born. Kari told us that our students have to live in fear of speaking up because they are not sure the person they speak to will understand. And so we really have to think about having more Black faculty and having representation in the faculty and students. Rahim told us a lot of things. One of them is that he says our faculty have to have the same expectations for Black as for white students. Steve McLoughlin told us about the invisible syndrome, where people can completely look at you and not see you. And that still goes on today. So I think there are many things that we've been told. One of the things that struck me from the chat is the comments that our staff have made about being disrespected. I think we can all be very sensitive and take a lot that we've heard today and move it forward. My feeling is that these kinds of forums are very helpful. And I would like to see us continue to have these kinds of candid discussions about race. I think they are long overdue because I think that certainly is one pathway to moving things forward positively. We have Don here. I don't know if you want to make some comments, Don, before we wrap up.
Yeah, first of all, Adjo, I wanted to thank you for putting this together. I thought the panelists were really powerful, and so I'm so grateful for you to reach out to them and to line this up. Thank you for summarizing the panelists' comments. I think one additional observation I would say is we started with a very general conversation about things going on in America. And we evolved into things that are happening in CEE and more locally. I've made a lot of notes, and I know you did as well. So I think we have a lot to talk about going forward and things to consider. I hope that the students and faculty and staff members on the line continue to share their thoughts. And I think a dialogue is really a positive thing and a way to move forward. And so first of all, thank you, and thanks to all the panelists.
Okay. Thank you to
Can
all
I
our
make
panelists.
one very quick comment before we end, if that's okay? I'm just going to. So I just want to. So I'm the first one, and I have no problem criticizing the Institute for needing to do better. We absolutely have to do better, and I think we will. But I do think it's really important to point out that we have made a lot of progress. Nowhere near what we need to. But we've had 3 Black chairs under the last president, 1 Hispanic provost, 3 Black deans, 2 Black VPs. And not only is this not found in our peers, this is not found in any PWI that has the engineering school. So it is a big deal. We've actually done a lot. I've sat and worked for hours right next to Don Webster as we fought to get an African-American faculty member tenured. After everybody else left, we sat and worked together to make that happen. That was me and Don. If it wasn't, if Steve McLoughlin did not appoint me as interim chair of ECE, and that is a big deal for a new dean. Whoever you appoint to run the largest school in the country, I would not be vice president at this point, right? So I want to make sure it's very clear that we have made progress, and we do have lots of folks that don't look like us that are sincerely interested in us being successful.
Excellent point. Thank you for making that point. So I'm not going to close the meeting, but I'm going to say officially we are closed so that those who want to go can go. Thank you so much for coming. Those who want to hang around and chat, you are very welcome to chat. I'm going to be here till you are chatted out, then we can all go for dinner. thank you very much to the panelists. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and all your contributions.
Thank you, Ajo.
Thank you, Adele.
Thank you for scheduling this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajo.
Thank you, Acho.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Burns, for recommending me to be on this too. So.
Well, thank you for coming. We reached out to you today, so it was really good to see you had the flexibility and you jumped in. So we appreciate that.
Absolutely. You guys take care, everybody. Stay safe.
So Kari says, okay, wonderful. We have people dropping off. Kari says if any students want to
I can say it, Ajo. I didn't drop off yet. I was just going to say I'm going to go spend some family time. But for anyone who is staying on the call, any of the staff members or students on the call at some point, if you need somebody to talk to, my door is always open, or my Blue Jeans chat is always open. So happy to continue the discussion.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kari.
Thank you, Ajo.
Okay, so somebody is asking where can they find the recording? Okay, Ashley has answered. We'll email it out or post it on the website. Okay. Okay, excellent. If we don't have any questions, comments, maybe we will all just say that maybe it's time to go and have dinner. Okay, I see everybody's checking out. So somebody says, Dr. Webster, when can we look forward to a follow-up with action steps for the school? Okay, so we will put our heads together, put our notes together, come up with some action plan and communicate it. And in a sense, I really think that maybe we should think about having a dialogue every so often. That is, I think, a helpful way to move forward. Okay, so we don't have any more chats. We have 50 people on there. The folks we still have on there, do you have any questions, any comments you want to make?
Dr. Amakuchi Kennedy, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your classes when I was at CEE. I'm an alumni now. Don't quite want to give my name, but you were an inspiration to everyone you taught, and I've learned so much from you, and thank you so much for hosting this.
Oh, thank you so much. I just wish I knew your name, but I appreciate that comment very much. Okay, so do we have anybody else who has some comments, questions? We are about to wrap up and close. And the nice thing is, if we didn't get to your question, we recorded this, so we are going to have access, hopefully, to the questions. Actually, I think we have access to the questions when we go back and look, right?
Yes, Ajo, and I'm also going to download the chat box so we can look through that as well.
Okay, excellent.
And
all
I
right.
think
Well,
the question
yes.
was asked about where the video will be. I guess it will be sent out. Was that already answered? I can't remember.
Yes, Ashley said
Okay.
she'll send it out. So
Okay, perfect. All
I
right.
think
Thank
we
you,
are good
Dr.
on-
Adjo.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of the panel. Well, so if there are no more questions, comments, or reflections, I think this is a good time for us to say thanks to everyone on the panel, everyone who participated. We really appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate everyone. Okay, we understand these are difficult times that we are going through, but we hope and we are going to work for the best. Okay, so let's keep our faces up and let's move forward. And I hope we continue to have these candid discussions, because certainly I think that's a good pathway forward. So with that, the meeting is closed. Have a good evening, everyone.